Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today and welcome. Welcome to Holocaust Memorial Day, Historical Memory and Collective Liberation. Today's event is organized by Namod, a movement of Jews in the UK mobilizing our community to oppose Israel's occupation and the system of apartheid. We join the struggle for a future of freedom, equality, and justice for all Palestinians and Israelis. And today we gather here in an act of remembrance and dedicate ourselves to fighting for collective liberation. And in doing so, we are reminded of the importance of our mission. This day holds profound significance as we come together to commemorate and to reflect on the Holocaust, on persecution, and on genocide. It is an occasion for us to honor the resilience of those who endured the unimaginable in the past and to confront the injustices of the present, which demand our urgent attention and action. The lessons that we draw from history are universal in scope, and they are fundamental to deepening our commitment to the sanctity of human life and the rights of all to dignity and to protection. What we witnessed yesterday was a historic development as the ICJ ruled that the acts committed by the Israeli state in Gaza plausibly fall within the scope of the Genocide Convention. We must recognize the enormity of this ruling and the responsibility that it places upon all of us. Without a ceasefire to prevent further indiscriminate bombardment, starvation, and civilian destruction, we cannot rest in our struggle to bring these atrocities to an immediate end. This moment is particularly heartbreaking for our community, given that the convention was written in the wake of the Shoah, when the Nazi regime murdered over 6 million Jews, up to 500,000 Roma, to 70,000 disabled people, and hundreds of thousands of LGBTQ people, communists, and prisoners of war. Generations later, these horrors continue to profoundly shape us, and they remind us daily to remain vigilant in fighting against oppression, no matter what form it comes in. It's important to remember that the persecution of Jews has historically been interlinked with attacks on other peoples. The Nazis started their book burning program in the 1930s with the library of Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld, a Jewish German sexologist who researched and provided gender-affirming care for trans people. In 2018, the gunmen who massacred Jews at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh attacked this community in part because of its work with the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, a Jewish organization supporting refugees seeking asylum in the United States. This is why we've gathered here today, to remember the trauma and the pain that has impacted our own communities, but also to stand together with all peoples and all groups who've been affected by crimes against humanity. Our liberation and safety is collective or it is impossible, and testimonies of solidarity and of survival are crucial so that we can transform this collective memory into something that offers us hope. Because of this, our event features an array of voices. We're honored to have Jewish, Palestinian, LGBTQ, Uyghur, and Bosnian speakers who will share their stories today. Following those talks, we're going to engage in discussions in small groups. And finally, we will come together for a Yiddish partisan song, a Jewish mourner's prayer, and a lighting of candles. These rituals are an important way of marking a moment, of standing apart in time, and honoring the memory of those who perished. Today, let us come together to remember, to mourn, and to draw strength from each other as we work towards a future where the principles of equality and of justice prevail. Thank you all for being with us here today.
Thank you for all who are in the room and online. We're honored to have five very unique guests to speak this evening. I'd like to introduce the first speaker, David Rosenberg. Just to give a bit of background, David is a member of Namod, a Jewish socialist group. He's an educator, a writer, and radical tour guide, co-organizer of educational trips to Auschwitz for trade unionists, anti-racist activist, teaches an adult education course about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, currently teaching a course on Jews in London from 1650s to 1950. And his discussion will broadly focus on response to the Holocaust as it was happening. So over to you, David.
Thank you very much for inviting me. it's obviously impossible to do justice to millions of personal tragedies. So I want to tell the story mainly about one person whose name was Shmuel Ziegelboim, a Polish Jewish socialist, anti-fascist, internationalist, and ardent anti-Zionist. His sudden death in London in May 1943 was intimately entwined with the destruction of Jews in Warsaw. So by my count, it's 6,000,001. You won't have read about him in the Jewish Chronicle or heard him praised by our chief rabbi or even Rachel Riley. A factory worker from the age of 10, he slept on park benches in his teens, was a trade union organizer in his 30s, and a prominent Bundist Jewish socialist in his early 40s when the Nazis invaded Poland. And if you're wondering what he looked like, this is what he looked like. This is Shmuel Ziegelboim. Okay. He was hunted by Nazi occupiers in Warsaw after committing a public act of defiance in November 1939, when the Nazis announced the first steps towards ghettoizing Jews. Ziegelboim told a mass gathering of Jews, don't go voluntarily into the ghetto, don't lose courage, remain in your homes until you are removed by force. Fearing for his life, his comrades hid him. They obtained false travel papers, then smuggled him out of Poland in January 1940, but with a mission. And that mission was to tell those with power in the West what was happening under Nazi occupation and persuade them to take extraordinary actions to save the Jews. He gave detailed reports in Belgium, France, and many cities in America. In March 1942, he was invited to represent the Bund on the Polish government in exile in London. Here he received news about the ongoing genocide through underground channels and relayed it to politicians, diplomats, the press. He wrote articles and spoke on BBC Radio. In September 1942, he told a mass Labour Party meeting about the Nazis' first use of poison gas for mass killing at Chełmno, where 40,000 Jews plus some Roma were murdered in 7 weeks. And at that point, he had information he was passing on that probably 700,000 Jews had been already murdered in all of Poland. Here he received news about the ongoing, read that, done that bit. In late 1942, Jan Karski, a non-Jewish Polish underground resistor, personally passed him a message from Bundists in the Warsaw Ghetto, imploring Ziegelboim to ask Jewish leaders in London to chain themselves to the gates of Parliament for a hunger strike until death, unless Britain acted. Ziegelboim told Karski they would never do that, but promised to do all that he could. By April 1943, he had exhausted every channel, almost every channel. In a letter he wrote to his brother Feivel, who left Poland before the war, he wrote, "I'm almost at the end of my tether. According to the latest news that reached me this week, 300,000 Jews are still alive in Poland," and that was from 3 million plus. But the slaughter continues. Here, people are making beautiful speeches to promote their party politics, and the Zionists are using the Jewish martyrdom as part of their fundraising campaign for Palestine. 2 momentous events began on April the 19th. In the Warsaw Ghetto, an incredible uprising began by hundreds of Bundist, communists, and left-wing Zionists in a united body, using smuggled and improvised weapons. Meanwhile, in Bermuda, Britain and American diplomats opened 11 days of talks about the situation in Poland and offered next to nothing practical for any Jewish refugees at the end of those 11 days. On the 10th of May, Ziegelboim received news that the ghetto uprising had been crushed. He spent the 11th of May writing a series of letters, and then he took an overdose of sodium amytal. His letters explained that his suicide was an act of protest against the Allied powers, whose indifference and failure to act permitted the extermination of Poland's Jews. And I think we can all hear some echoes there today. Ziegelboim continued, The responsibility falls in the first instance on the perpetrators, but indirectly it burdens the peoples and governments who have made no effort to put a stop to this crime. And an extract from one of his last letters. I cannot remain silent. I cannot live while the remnants of the Jewish people, whose representative I am, are being exterminated. My comrades in the Warsaw Ghetto perished with their weapons in their hands in their last heroic battle. It was not my destiny to die as they did, together with them, but I belong to them and to their mass graves. By my death, I wish to make the strongest possible protest against the passivity with which the world is permitting the extermination of the Jewish people. My life belongs to the Jewish people in Poland, and therefore I give it to them. I wish that the surviving remnants could live to see, with the Polish population, the liberation it could know in Poland, in a world of freedom and in the justice of socialism. Ziegelboim's story is discomforting for a British state that took so few refugees before the war, failed to act on credible information during the war, and admitted such small numbers of Holocaust survivors after the war. It ought to also embarrass the British Jewish establishment too, who made no effort to memorialize Ziegelboim. And it needed a grassroots action in the 1990s by a committee of Bundist survivors in London who had known Ziegelboim personally, and younger Jewish socialists, myself included, I was young then, to achieve a memorial plaque that was unveiled in 1996, with members of Ziegelboim's surviving family flying in to be present. He did not know it, but one of his 3 children, Yossel, survived and fought as a Red Army partisan. Yossel read about his father's death in circumstances that are very poignant tonight, given our panel. Yossel wrote to me in 1994 about how his partisan group liberated the city of Gornji Vakuf in Bosnia from the Nazis. And in the Nazi headquarters, he found a German newspaper dated 21st May 1943 that carried a mocking article about his father's suicide. Yossel added, the televised accounts of the bloody fighting in Bosnia right now bring back those terrible memories. In educational work, the Bundists on our committee, such as Esther, who survived Auschwitz, Vlodka, who survived the Warsaw Ghetto and is still alive, and Maya, always stressed the range of Holocaust victims, especially the Roma, who they said died in the same ways as the Jews for exactly the same reasons. And these Bundists insisted on drawing universal lessons from the Churban, the destruction, to combat all racism, welcome all refugees, and create a world based on respect for everyone's human rights. Ziegelboim's young comrade, Marek Edelman, second in command of the uprising, who died in Poland in 2009, retained his socialist, anti-Zionist and anti-fascist politics till he died. When he was in his 70s, he took part in a convoy from Poland taking aid to Bosnia. Edelman openly challenged the lies of Israeli politicians who dishonestly tried to weave together the Warsaw Ghetto resistance with the war to establish Israel. Edelman reminded them, we fought for dignity and freedom, not for territory, nor for a national identity. I want to finish with the words of a left-wing Israeli no longer alive called Boaz Evron. In 1983, in the wake of Israel's trail of destruction in southern Lebanon, so reminiscent for me with what is happening in Gaza today, he wrote of the 2 tragedies, he said, had happened to the Jewish people in the 20th century. One was the Holocaust, the other was the lessons drawn from it, especially by Israel's leaders and many Israelis. And he says, they internalized a strange moral blindness, where the world is always conceived as a hater and persecutor, where Israelis consider themselves free of all moral obligation in their relation to it, free to contract agreements with the world's most oppressive regimes, to negotiate arms deals with the worst governments, and to oppress non-Jews subject to their rule. Here tonight, I think we will show the opposite. We will show about our desire to liberate both Palestinians and Jews from that reactionary nationalist mindset. And that way we can build a world of equality and dignity for all. Thank you.
Thank you, David. For our next invited speaker this evening, we're joined by Rainer Shulze. Rainer is Professor Emeritus of Modern History at the University of Essex, one of the project leaders of the Gedenkstätte Bergen-Belsen exhibition between 2000 to 2007, and led Essex's Holocaust Memorial Week between 2007 and 2016. He's the founder of the Dora Love Prize in 2012, now in its 12th year. Rainer has worked as a historical consultant for Holocaust Bergen-Belsen related projects. Recently, he contributed to the documentary Legendary Children, commemorating the 50th anniversary of Pride marches in London. From 2017 to 2019, he curated and presented Tales from the Margins, a film program highlighting LGBTQ rights globally, and continues to be a steadfast contributor to LGBTQ History Month events. So I'd like to welcome Rainer.
Thank you for those kind words and the invitation. It's a bit difficult to follow David, because I won't focus on one individual, which is always much more impressive and emotional. I just wanted to share with you some reflections on the day that we have today, Holocaust Memorial Day, and the need to reclaim it for purposes that are not necessarily in the interest of the governing classes. But the starting point is that we rarely ask ourselves why we should remember the Holocaust. We simply assume that we should or have to. But if we only go through the motions of uttering phrases such as "we remember and never again," remembering the Holocaust will become very quickly a meaningless ritual. It is important to keep in mind that Holocaust Memorial Day is actually a relatively new date in all national calendars. The United Nations only introduced it officially in November 2005. In Britain, it has been held as a national Memorial Day since 2001, in Germany since 1996. And also the term Holocaust as a popular term for what happened. Yeah, and there I have to kind of stutter, because general understanding what happened to the Jews, replacing the term Shoah, is relatively new and goes back to an American four-part program called Holocaust, which went through an individual family showing what happened to Jews in the Second World War. In the run-up to the first Holocaust Memorial Day in the UK, then Prime Minister Tony Blair, not necessarily probably a love figure here, explicitly related the Holocaust to recent events of ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, former Yugoslavia, when he said, "I am determined to ensure that the horrendous crimes against humanity committed during the Holocaust are never forgotten. The ethnic cleansing and killing that has taken place in Europe in recent weeks are a stark example of the need for vigilance." But there was also controversy from the very start. The British Council of Muslims refused to attend the ceremonies from 2001 until 2007. They explicitly boycotted it in 2009, arguing that the UK Holocaust Memorial Day, and this is a quote from their 2001 press release, totally excludes and ignores the ongoing genocide and violation of human rights in the occupied Palestine territories, in Jammu and Kashmir and elsewhere, but that it did include, to the anger of the British Council of Muslims, and now again quote, the controversial question of alleged Armenian genocide, as well as the so-called gay genocide. The Armenians in turn complained that the Armenian genocide was not properly recognized, to which the UK government, an advisor to Tony Blair, responded that while it understood that the Armenian genocide was, quote, an appalling tragedy, It wanted, again, quote, to avoid the risk of the message becoming too diluted if we try to include too much history. So basically what I'm saying is politics has always played a huge role in Holocaust remembrance. And that was already the case before the official national annual commemoration started. But instead of using these controversies to discuss what Holocaust Memorial Day is or should be, what we commemorate and why, the official commemorations, especially in the last decade or so, have decided to play it safe, putting on very impressive ceremonies, which are somehow feeling stale and frozen in ritual. As we all agree very quickly, just saying that we don't want something like the Holocaust to happen again has not really worked, has it? And what made the Holocaust possible and other genocides and atrocities against people because of who they are is still very virulent all around us. Preconceptions and prejudice, and the rejection or the fear of someone just because they are different, they are not one of us. So remembering needs to be guided by compassion, crossing divides. It needs to be linked to the search for truth. And this basically means talking with each other, listening to each other, and encouraging everyone to tell their stories no matter what their identity. Obviously, because of the sheer number who perished and because of the industrialization of their extermination, the fate of the Jews has always been at the heart of Holocaust remembrance. But this has all too often meant that the stories of other groups of populations who were also marginalized and persecuted by the Nazis have been forgotten or overlooked or not taken seriously. The Roma and Sinti, often labeled as gypsies, disabled people, gay men, Jehovah's Witnesses, Soviet prisoners of war, Slavic people, people of color. Why would Black youngsters be interested in the Holocaust if no one tells them that Black people were affected by the Holocaust as well? They were all not deemed worthy of being part of the German Volksgemeinschaft, the community of the German master race. And by overlooking these voices, by ignoring those voices, we miss the chance of keeping the Holocaust relevant to the younger generations. We miss the chance also of seeing historical continuities from before the Nazi period well into the post-war period and into our present world. Let's just very briefly look at the Roma and Sinti. There had never been a Roma emancipation similar to the emancipation of the Jews in the 19th century. Roma had always remained second-class citizens virtually everywhere, with special laws and regulations in place targeting them, even if the title of the laws sounded slightly broader, like laws against vagrancy or laws to abolish the workshop. There were special camps for Roma and Sinti. There were central registries for traveling people. And many of these special laws put in place by democratic governments, which means democratic governments per se are not necessarily a solution against persecution. Many of these special laws remained in place after 1945. And for many decades, Roma and Sinti were not recognized as victims of Nazi persecution, did not get any compensation for the losses they incurred. Or look at the Nazi crusade against male homosexuality. Again, the Nazis did not invent anti-homosexual legislation. Anti-homosexual legislation did not end with the Nazis. In fact, as with the Roma, the Nazis could and did use deep-rooted public attitudes and existing laws for their battle against male homosexuality. Anti-homosexual sentiments in politics had been around for centuries, since the medieval and early modern period, but they then became enshrined in law. The famous Buggery Act of 1553 here in England, or paragraph 175 in Germany. The Nazis regarded homosexual men as enemies of the state and a threat to the recovery of the German national body, the German Volk. The precise number of victims of the Nazi crusade against male homosexuality is all but impossible to establish. Estimates are that up to 100,000 men, possibly more, were arrested for offenses against paragraph 175, with about half of them, around 50,000, actually sentenced. Around 10,000, possibly up to 15,000 of them, ended up in concentration camps. And it will probably never be known how many of them perished there. Only few documents have survived, and mainstream historians were not at all interested in researching what happened to gay men, as they were not really interested in researching what happened to all the other victim groups, Roma and Sinti, disabled, etc. What is clear, however, is that the death rate of homosexual prisoners in the camps was amongst the highest of all victim groups. Perhaps as many as 60% of gay concentration camp prisoners perished, and it was usually very quick. After 4 months, 1 in 4 had died. After a year, 1 in 2. The arrival of Allied forces in the first months of 1945 was a moment of liberation for the vast majority of the concentration camp survivors. For many of the gay concentration camp prisoners, however, the end of Nazi rule did not bring freedom. Once the camps were shut down, some homosexual inmates were immediately rearrested as criminals under Allied occupation and sent back to prison if they had not served their full sentence before they had been deported to a concentration camp. And the argument was, these were not Nazi laws. We have them in all European countries. They are the laws of a civilized society, and therefore they continued. And at the very least, liberated gay concentration camp prisoners were forced to keep their time in the camps as a secret for fear of being rearrested. From the camps, they went right back into the closet. The tightened version of paragraph 175, tightened up by the Nazis in 1935, was not repealed as a Nazi law, but remained in force. And the pink lists that the Nazis and governments before them, going well back into the 19th century, continued. And as you know, here in this country, it took until the late 1960s until male homosexuality was partially decriminalized. But that didn't mean that gay concentration camp prisoners were recognized as victims of Nazi persecution. It took until 2021. And then, of course, everyone was dead for a compensation law to be passed. And those are the stories that are usually not included in our current conversations on Holocaust Memorial Day. And I can look at all the other victim groups as well. But for remembering to be meaningful, it is necessary that we relate what happened during the Holocaust to our present situation, to the world we live in today. And this means asking ourselves what attitudes and prejudices still prevail around us and within ourselves that contributed to making the Holocaust possible. That's where I believe future Holocaust remembrance event must start, looking at continuities and possibly discontinuities, but also looking at differences between the way groups were persecuted by the Nazis. I mean, no need to mention anti-Semitism is on the rise, anti-Gypsyism never went away, Islamophobia, xenophobia, this being swamped by migrants, which is shamelessly fueled by the tabloids and politicians. The number of reported hate crimes are up, and in particular, hate crimes against LGBTQ plus people, and within that category, trans people. Ethnic conflict is escalating in many parts of the world. Holocaust Memorial Day, if understood correctly, in my view, is a day to ask ourselves how far we have come in accepting difference into our understanding of community, and how far we as individuals are willing to stand up to prejudice and discrimination. It is, of course, a day to remember what happened between 1933 and 1945, but we must go beyond that and address attitudes which still drive people to discriminate against others. Attitudes which are still very much alive. As the Holocaust reminds us, it is only a very short step from unacceptable to unworthy of it. Holocaust Memorial Day must be an uncomfortable day, which puts us out of our normal comfort zone. We have to face up to issues which are painful. We have to talk to people that we would normally not voluntarily talk to. We also have to face up to our own deep-rooted prejudices, the little Hitler inside of us, as I often call it. And when we say never again, this must apply to everyone, irrespective of ethnicity. We usually just talk about ethnicity. It must apply to gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, etc., etc. Whilst never losing sight of the significance of the Holocaust for European Jewry and the Sinti and Roma, we must incorporate the stories and experiences of all groups persecuted, marginalized, and murdered by the Nazis in their delusionary attempt to create a pure and homogeneous Volksgemeinschaft. And we must also include all the stories and experiences of all groups who are today facing identity-based prejudice, discrimination, and hatred. This is the message of the mass graves at former concentration campsites, where thousands of dead lie indiscriminately, body to body, next to each other, no matter what their identity. Much is at stake. And to be honest, I can't remember a period in my lifetime when I have ever been as pessimistic about our future as I'm now. If the Holocaust tells us anything loud and clear, it tells us that if the human rights of one group are violated, no group can feel safe. Thank you.
So I'd just like to thank our previous two speakers for their amazing, really powerful speeches. And we're going to move on to the second half of our speakers tonight. So the next speaker that I'm going to announce is Maira Aisa. Maira is an Uyghur activist and president of the UK Uyghur community. She was born in exile to an Uyghur family that fled East Turkestan in 1955. For years, she has been defending Uyghur human rights and participating in workshops and projects preserving Uyghur culture and identity. She is a member of the London Uyghur School and of the World Uyghur Congress.
Hi, good evening. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me and giving an opportunity to speak at the Holocaust Memorial Day to remember the victims of the Holocaust. It's been relatively said to the Holocaust, never again. But unfortunately, we're still witnessing genocides happening in the world and experiencing ourselves like we do Uyghurs. So my name is Maira. I'm Uyghur. I was born in exile. My father fled East Turkestan in 1955 with his family, and so all my siblings and the rest of my father's family were born in exile. So although the Uyghur genocide been recently in the news, I mean, since 2016, where we know that the crackdown was announced in the region, or Uyghurs were asked, and other minorities were asked to, obviously identity wise, everyone's IDs were collected just to make sure people are not been traveling from the region and to the region. And yeah, so the situation just deteriorated since 2016. However, genocide and oppression has been going on for decades. I mean, if you look back to the history, so from 1955, from 1949, when the land was occupied by the Communist Party, so the oppression started then. And in 2016, so everything has deteriorated, and now we are experiencing, so obviously from 2000, when the crackdown was announced, so Uyghurs were taking rights to just be Uyghurs. So the language is not allowed. So we can't practice our religion. So we have to denounce our identity, and we just purely forced to speak Chinese, live in Chinese manner. And yeah, this has been happening for years now. So Uyghurs in exile, so we don't have access. Most of us don't have access to our loved ones. We don't know what's been happening with them since 2016 because their phones been cut off. They've been relocated to other places in the region and outside the region in the main land of China. And the main reason might be the slavery, because as there are many concentration camps in the region been built since 2016. So people massively been detained, people been tortured, and then re-educated, as the Communist Party says. However, the re-education is either so people going through certain stages from torture, so from organ search. So if your organs are fine, so you've been targeted for organ harvesting. And so from the research also it says that the big flow and requests for halal organs have been made, massively since 2016. So this happening to Uyghurs and other minorities, and we've got more than 15 victims of so either coming from camp directly or so teachers, workers. So and in 2021 there was a tribunal, a Uyghur tribunal in London, so where the many statements were presented. So what they say, what they've seen, what they've witnessed, what they experienced, it all been said and even shown. So it's very horrible to see what people been going through, living through, what they've been forced to do. So again, from the beginning of the crackdown, so that there's was a policy, about 52 pages of a policy. So what the Chinese Communist Party has to do in the region in order to make sure everyone is complying with that policy and rules. About 48 crimes were listed for Uyghurs. If you're bad, if you're praying, so if you're even having more than specific numbers of knives in a household, so that was a crime. People's phones were searched, and still been searching everyone. The civilian state in the region is so high. So more than $60 million was spent for all that civilian state to be built and all the cameras. So people even entering their properties now has cameras. So everyone's movement is under control. And when the mass detention started, so Uyghur men were young men, so were taken to the concentration camp or prison. So households with children, elderly, and women were left. And then the Chinese officials so forced families to have a guest, the relative guest, as they consider. So a Chinese official has to leave, a male has to leave in our with our families, and so they allowed to do everything. so their behavior. So you as a host, so I have to please the guest as much as possible, and that's a very humiliating state. So which is it's not something that you know, in our religion or in our mentality we can allow, but this is happening. We've been forced to do that, and this official has been reporting everything on what's happening in the household. So we say, so they monitor if you wake up in the morning to pray, so that's recorded as crime. So if you speak to someone on the phone, so everything, every single step in your home is controlled. So which is very unacceptable. And so those who detained, as I mentioned, they've been either tortured or taken from one position to another. If it's a lawyer, so they were sent to just become a teacher, or in factories. So it's because we've got lots of topics and research about slave labor. So we see that we've always been gaining other profession, going into those factories, work for either free or for nothing, and then so they've been brought to the state that they have to leave the region. And we've been having evidence from when people didn't return to the homeland, so we don't know what's happening to them. Being in the concentration camp also, so if you're is after several months, probably if they found out that you are useless, so they've just, you know, they try to inject people with different illnesses. And so the way that they do, so they provide, so they give medication or injections in a way, and they know that one disease will trigger another, and after several time, I mean a certain time, so you're dead. So if the person is released from concentration camp and go home, so they're not allowed to seek medical advice for the next 6 months. So because they know the whatever they give to the person, they just, you know, it's develop, deteriorate, and then bring it to death. So that's why many people been dying after the concentration camp, or being in the concentration camp. If their immunity is weak, so the disease would develop quickly. So we've got lots of, you know, death happening either from so we're hearing like somebody's a friend, family died in the camp or outside after being released like 3-4 months. So many people don't leave more than 6 months. So this has been done on purpose, been you know, the time is calculated. And for, one of my very close friends, so their brother was detained, and once they were released, so they got cancer. So and the doctors concluded, so the person was able to go outside, and the doctor concluded that it was artificially infected, artificially given and developed. And then the person's immunity was strong. They survived the cancer, but then after certain time, so they had a stroke, which also was triggered by the treatment. I'm sorry, I have to cut off here. So what I just want to say is that this is happening nowadays. So we are losing our identity. We are losing our right to be Uyghurs. And unfortunately, we know, so our, you know, what we are have to stand for. and then who is the Chinese Communist Party. So we believe that amongst others who've been experiencing genocide, so our voices will be heard, and we would get enough support. Thank you.
So thank you, Maira. I imagine that was a really, really hard thing to talk about public speak. So our next speaker is a fellow Bosnian, Arnesa Buljušmić-Kustura, tripping over my own language here. She is a genocide researcher and educator, writer and activist. Her work deals with ethno-nationalism, genocide denialism, the trauma of children and women in war zones. She's the author of Letters from Diaspora and the former deputy director of Remembering Srebrenica. Her words and work have been featured and published on BBC, The Guardian, amongst others. And she is currently working as an advisor for Law for Palestine, as well as being part of the Scholars of Genocide Expert Group, alongside scholars such as Khassagal, who I'm sure many of us in the room know. Thank you for having me. Today obviously marks an immensely important day, Holocaust Memorial Day. It's good to be amongst like-minded people as we commemorate the 6 million Jews, the countless other victims of one of the worst atrocities in our history. My name is Arnesa Buljušmić-Kustura. I am a genocide educator and researcher, but I am also a genocide survivor. When I was 5 years old, the country that I was born in ceased to exist. The former Socialist Republic, Federal Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia disintegrated, causing a war to take root in places such as Slovenia, then Croatia, and then eventually coming to Bosnia. My family was from Visegrad, as well as from Sarajevo. I survived the siege of Sarajevo. Unfortunately, many of my family members did not. My grandmother was killed when she was cooking breakfast for her family and Serb forces shelled her home. She was an innocent civilian. My father was imprisoned in a concentration camp, along with his father, his brother, and many other of their family members. My father was the only one who survived. My grandfather and my uncle were massacred on the Drina River, and their remains were thrown in. We have still not found the remains of my uncle. We found the remains of my grandfather in 2001. My aunt was imprisoned in Vila na Vlas, now a tourist attraction, but back then it was a rape camp where Bosnian women were systematically raped in an effort to exterminate our very identity, and in the words of Serb forces, to breed chetniks. I lost a lot. When I was 5 years old, I was shot at by a sniper, and I was barely able to survive thanks to the kindness of my neighbors. I saw a lot, but I still consider myself one of the lucky ones. Unfortunately, 1,600 other children in Sarajevo were killed. Countless other children in places such as Visegrad, Prijedor, and of course Srebrenica, which is the most notably known crime, were massacred. Women were systematically raped all throughout the territory, and Serb forces committed massacre after massacre, concealing or attempting to conceal their crimes in mass graves that have been found since then all throughout Bosnia. Not only primary mass graves, but secondary and even tertiary mass graves were created in an effort to conceal their crimes. Today in Bosnia, many of those war criminals continue to live side by side with their victims. A Bosnian survivor of the concentration camp, Omarska in Prijedor, has to walk by her rapists every single day.
It has been 30 years since the Bosnian genocide, and unfortunately, the ethno-nationalism which led to the dissolution of Yugoslavia, as well as the genocide in Bosnia, as well as the ethnic cleansing and the massacres in Kosovo, is very much still alive. In order to bring us peace, the Western world, the Western powers, decided to implement the Dayton Agreement, which did bring peace and the shooting did stop. However, it split the country by ethnic lines. So the millions of people, actually 2.2 million people who were displaced systematically during the Bosnian genocide, when they attempt to return to their homes, they're often faced with harassment and celebration and triumphalism of genocide. Genocide denialism is not a new concept. Holocaust denialism has unfortunately been alive for a very, very long time. But we are also seeing genocide denialism alive very much in the case of the Bosnian genocide, but even currently with what's happening in Palestine. As a survivor of the genocide, I cannot tell you how horrific it has been to watch the past 3 months, as the same scenes that we saw during the siege of Sarajevo and in Srebrenica are being live broadcasted in front of our very faces on our TV, on our phones, and so many other people are choosing to stay silent instead of speak out. Yesterday's decision was a landmark watershed moment in the realm of international justice. I, alongside many other people, waited with my breath, I suppose. You know the saying, sorry. My brain is a bit mush as this past week has been particularly hectic and difficult. But we waited to hear the news of the ruling. And while many people were disappointed that the court did not call for a cessation of military activity, it did impose provisional measures that were much stronger than in the case of Bosnia back in 1993, and actually even in the case of Gambia versus Myanmar. And I'm probably mispronouncing that, but I apologize. English is my second language, so we'll blame it on that. It was a landmark watershed moment, as I said, in the realm of international law. It was not what we precisely wanted, but it does put Israel on notice. And when it comes to that, it should put the entire world on notice. We have witnessed 75 years of what I call memory washing projects with the Holocaust and with Srebrenica. We have events, we have politicians that come to those events and they tell us never again. And yet the same acts that we saw in the Holocaust, that we saw in Bosnia, that we saw in Rwanda, Cambodia, Sudan, Palestine, Syria are continuously repeated. Never again is simply not enough. It will not do anything for us to continuously reiterate some empty words, particularly when it's coming from our politicians. We must take accountability for our own complicity. We must take accountability for our own actions. The times when we choose to look the other way, when we see somebody being discriminated against, when we see hatred being spread, when we say that it's not our problem, it's not our business, or when we try to justify it and we say, it's not that big of a deal, I have things to deal with too. We have to take accountability as individuals before we can come together and actually communally as a community come together and stand against injustice worldwide. I have spent most of my life thinking about what happened to me. I decided to go into the world, I suppose, of genocide research and genocide education, particularly because of what happened to me, and particularly because what I wanted was to ensure that what happened to me was not repeated to another child. I did not want to turn on my phone and see thousands of Palestinian children being killed. And I know that today is Holocaust Memorial Day, and I know that there are people who take issue with us bringing up the current situation in Gaza. And I know that there's even people who would take issue with us bringing up the other victims of other genocides, but we have to stand together. Otherwise we will fall apart, as we have seen has continuously happened. We are more isolated than ever. We are more prone to discrimination than ever. And all the progress that we have made is not going to matter anything. It will not matter one little bit unless we actually stand systematically against injustice, unless we actually pressure our governments, our politicians in a very real manner to act, to take accountability. I want to ensure that the Holocaust is not repeated. And I don't want to do it through empty words and empty slogans. I want to ensure that the Bosnian genocide is not repeated. And unfortunately, even now, there are many people in Bosnia who are quite afraid, who believe that there is the possibility of another conflict, that there is a possibility of another genocide. That is a terrifying thought to the many survivors who have witnessed some of the worst things that humanity has to offer. One of my closest friends lost 99 members of her family in the genocide in Srebrenica. 99 members of her family. Only 3 members of her family remain. That is a horrific statistic. And she is just one person in a sea of millions of others, not just in Bosnia, but all throughout the world. As we come together today to remember the Holocaust, to remember the victims, the Jewish victims, the Roma victims, the Slavic victims, the disabled victims, LGBTQ victims, and the many dissidents, socialists, communists, who bravely attempted to take a stand against fascism, we have to promise to ourselves and to each other that we will take a stance, that we will move forward, demanding accountability and justice over empty words and empty slogans. Thank you so much.
Now it's my honor to introduce Dr. Bashir Abu-Manneh. Bashir is head of school and reader in post-colonial literature at the University of Kent, and author of the Palestinian novel From 1948 to the Present, published in 2016, and Fiction of the New Statesman, 1913 to 1939, published in 2011. He's also edited a collection of essays on Edward Said as literary critic and post-colonial theorist, entitled After Said, Post-Colonial Literary Studies in the 21st Century, published in 2019. He's also a regular contributor to Jacobin.
Thank you, Naama, for the invitation. Thank you, Mahmoud, for holding this event. And I'm happy to stand here with comrades and with fellow socialists. So I'm going to talk about Gaza. It's been 113 days of war on Gaza. What we're witnessing is the world's most powerful army, one of the world's most powerful armies, bombing to oblivion one of the world's most densely populated areas. I think the scale of the bombing, the rate of the bombing is unprecedented in recent history, as is the pace of the killing. Hiroshima many times over, whole cities destroyed, whole areas decimated, whole families wiped out. 26,000 Palestinians have been killed, without counting the dead, of course, under the rubble. Many more injured, all mostly civilians. Over 1% of Gazans have been killed, which is rich equivalence of 700,000 people in the UK. So there's a whole generation which is maimed, a whole generation which is permanently marked by this war. 1.7 million Gazans out of a population of 2.3 million have been displaced. There's starvation, there's a risk for famine. The phrase "nowhere is safe in Gaza" has been used a lot. It's a tired phrase, it's an overused phrase, it's a phrase that goes back to 2009, 2014, but it's no less true. Gaza, as a result of this war, is now uninhabitable, has no electricity, there's no gas, there's no water, it's besieged and it's daily terrorized by the IDF. There's a massive human tragedy which is unfolding in front of our eyes every day in Gaza. So I think it's therefore unsurprising, very welcome, that the ICJ has now agreed to investigate plausible genocide and has ordered Israel to stop violating the Genocide Convention. The ICJ also asked Israel to, quote, take all measures within the power to prevent the commission of all acts within the scope of Article 2, namely killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part, and finally imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. This was announced, of course, yesterday, a day before Holocaust Memorial. This decision, I think, is a real victory for humanity. A victory for never again for anyone in the world. It's an enactment of universalism at a point when hope has been nearly totally lost. So I think clearly Israel's response to this decision was killing 200 Palestinians. Unsurprisingly. The war is not over yet. The court's decision will have to be implemented politically. But Israel's impunity, I think, has ended. Israel is being held accountable in international, not only public opinion, but also legally for its violations of international law and for committing genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza. So against the falsifiers or the state propagandists in Israel and elsewhere, the BBC has been working very hard to falsify and to lie and to defend state power. It's abysmal. The war on Gaza, I think, as a result of this decision, will go down in history for what it really is. It's a genocidal military campaign against essentially a defenseless population. That's how it's experienced. I think that's how it will go down in history. The ICJ's decision is therefore also, I think, a victory for historical truth, which is very important when these battles happen. I'd like to pause a little bit. I think what merits further pause is this question of Israel's justification, which is something that Israel has used for a very long time. Those of us who've been witnessing the wars on Gaza from 2008 onwards, if you go back to the period of 2000 and the suppression of the Second Intifada, there was this core justification, this core mantra, which is rehearsed on every news media outlet, mainstream media outlet, which is that Israel has a right of self-defense. I'd like to pause just a little bit here because I think it's an important point. It's a vexing point, but it's a point that I think also needs to be rejected. You don't get to mass kill, mass destroy, mass starve, and call it self-defense. You don't get to systematically dehumanize a whole society by force for your own society to feel secure. Self-defense is about stopping an attack, which Israel did manage to do on its territory within 24 hours, maybe a little bit more. The Hamas attack was stopped. But it's not about decimating the other side. That's not self-defense. The question of self-defense, I think, is very vexing ideologically because it distracts from fundamental truths about Israel and what Israel is doing. That Israel is an illegal occupier. It's a fundamental truth. That it violates the Palestinian right of self-determination in everything it does. So crucially, I think the self-defense mantra turns Israel into the victim here when it's actually the perpetrator of crimes. You can't invoke self-defense against the people whose national rights you violate. You can't accrue rights and benefits from a violation of the rights legally. This came up as well in the South African submission, which I was very pleased to see that this issue was engaged. South African lawyer Representative Von Law reminded the court that back in 2004, the same court, when it thought about and considered the question of the wall and whether the wall is against international law, concluded against the applicability, it's very important to remember this, of self-defense in areas Israel occupies. Meaning, very simply, that Israel can't claim self-defense in relation to occupied Palestinians. It's as simple as that. Vaughan also added, he said there's a much simpler point to make, and I'm quoting him now. He says that the prohibition on genocide is absolutely preemptory rule of law. Nothing can ever justify genocide, he adds. And he also elaborated, it's worth to continue the quote, that no matter how monstrous or appalling an attack or provocation is, genocide is never permitted, is a never permitted response. Every use of force must stay within the limits of international law, including the explicit duty of Article 1, he concluded, of the Convention to prevent genocide. That's fundamental for him. In other words, Hamas's atrocities on 7th of October do not justify what even ex-Tory minister was very eloquent about this, of Defense Ben Wallace, said in the Telegraph a couple of weeks ago. He described Israel's response to the 7th of October as Israel's killing range. It was a very accurate description. In Gaza, Israel cannot violate international law because Hamas did. It doesn't allow it to do so. This is not to pick on Israel, like Netanyahu likes to say every time, picking on poor Israel. This is not to treat Israel exceptionally. It's the opposite. This is about upholding universal standards for everyone, including, it's very difficult for some people to hear, but also including for those who resist occupation. So in his ICJ argument, Vaughan Law also used an intriguing phrase that I want to mention in his submission that explains Israel's acts. He said, Israel's action is not self-defense, but these actions are enforcing its occupation. It's a very useful phrase to think about in order to think about why Israel is undertaking the campaign in Gaza. This brings me to the last thing I want to say today, that the war on Gaza is a colonial war, that it's a war of ethnic cleansing, a war for settlement, a war for liquidating the Palestinian question for generations to come. It's a war for pacifying the Palestinians and taking over their lands. It's a war for upholding, after the nation-state law in Israel 2008, it's a law of upholding Jewish supremacy across Israel-Palestine. Even genocide has a politics, which we should remember. Wiping out Gaza is about fundamentally about Israel's imperial prestige in the region. It's usually referred to as state deterrence, as if Israel is the only state in the world that is allowed to have state deterrence, and that needs to be protected, which was totally shattered by 7th of October. This war is not about returning refugees. That would have been very easy to return the hostages. That can be achieved very easily through peaceful means. It's also not about protecting Israelis. I don't think you protect Israelis by undertaking a campaign of state terrorism. That can only produce more violence, and it can only make your citizens more insecure in the future. So this war is about ensuring Israel's military supremacy and freedom in the region, freedom to act everywhere and anywhere. Is there another state in the region that runs a state assassination campaign everywhere and anywhere it wants? I mean, it's mind-boggling what Israel is allowed to do in the region. Right? It's about force remaining the main mechanism of state conduct in Israel. It's about, of course, re-legitimizing the IDF in the eyes of Israelis and also in the eyes of the world. It's about shunning peace and blocking Palestinian rights. I think the aim of this war is to criminalize a whole people. It is to make them killable. It is to say that it's okay, since they're all terrorists, it's okay to kill them at will whenever you want. That's what the war is fundamentally about. Hence the intentional obfuscation of Hamas and the Palestinians. Hence the criminally expansive and permissive sense of what and who is a target. That's constantly very permissive in international law. Hence the statements for incitement to genocide that we heard. Gallant's language, defense minister, about human animals. President Herzog if there's a hawk and there's a dove, Herzog is supposed to be a dove, but he's really not that much of a dove, right? Yeah. He's kind of a genocide supporter who talked about an entire nation, this is his quote, out there that is responsible. This is genocidal language. So I want to end on a positive note. You always have to. I think yesterday was a good day for humanity. It brings justice, I think, closer. But it requires massive political pressure from below on governments to turn popular opinion into policy in this country and also in the US, more importantly, also in Germany, to hold Israel accountable for its crimes, to uphold international law as the best mechanism for achieving peace and reconciliation. I think however long it takes, the two peoples in Israel and Palestine have no other choice but to share. No one's going anywhere. It's kind of an initial premise that everyone has to understand and to find ways of living together. This can only happen if there's equality between them as peoples and also as nations. I think equal rights would curb war and it would also foster reconciliation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bashir. That was incredibly evocative, and the statement at the very end, especially, just so aligned to the values of Namod. And thank you for all our other speakers that joined this evening and online. Every one of them had just such powerful things to say. We're coming to the end of this event. We're going to take a 5-minute, very short break, just for the people in the room to stretch your legs and take some water or some leftover snacks. And then we're going to come back and just do a bit of a wrapping up ceremonial part of the event. So thank you. So we're going to close this this evening, and first of all, thank you so much all for coming, and for everyone online for joining us and experiencing this event together. We're going to close by rather than a mournful moment, we want to kind of use the end to rejoice and have a collective singing. So we're going to bring David Rosenberg back on, who's going to sing the Yiddish partisan song, and there'll be words as well.
I'm joining him.
Yep. Can we join the? This is This is Judith. You're going to say something about the song.
Yeah, I'll just very briefly. This song was written in the Vilna ghetto. Vilna is to people who are not Jewish. And it was written in 1942 by Hirschglick, who was very young. And he escaped. I mean, there are lots of contradictory stories, but I think he escaped from the ghetto and was never seen again. So we don't know what his fate was. All right. And he wrote the words of this song and used an existing Russian tune, and it became the hymn of the partisans. And the key sentiment of this song and the key words of this song are "Wir seinen da," we are here. And the "Sag nicht keinmal, dass du gehst den letzten Weg" means don't ever say that we're going down the last road. Don't lose hope. And the assertion, "Wir seinen da," we are here, is also an important assertion for everybody here on earth, that wherever we live, that's where we belong. If people know the song, they can join in. If they don't know the song, they'll probably pick up the refrain. The last line of each verse is repeated. So the last two lines, sorry, are repeated in each verse. So when you've heard them the first time, you should probably be able to join in the second time they come round.
Yeah, and it's strictly phonetic going down on the
Yes,
left-hand side.
what you've got is Yiddish, which was the language spoken by the vast majority of the people who perished in the Holocaust. It was written in Hebrew characters, which you can see down the middle of the page. The left-hand side is transliteration into English, and the right-hand side is a translation. Okay.
Yeah.
Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst den letzten Weg. Hoschimmen bleiene, verstellen bläue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird erbeut und unser Trott mir seinen Do. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird erbeut und unser Trott mir seinen Do. Vom grünen Palmenland bis weißen Land von Schnee. Wir kommen an mit unser Pein, mit unser Weg. Und wo gefallen sie, spritzt von unser Blut. Sprossen wird dort unser Gwure, unser Mut. Und wo gefallen sie, spritzt von unser Blut. Sprossen wird dort unser Gwure, unser Mut. Es wird morgens und begilden uns im Heim. Und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Nur euch versammeln wird die Sonne in dem Kajor. Wie ein Parol, so ging das Lied von dort zu dort. Nur euch versammeln wird die Sonne in dem Kajor. Wie ein Parol, so ging das Lied von dort zu dort. Das Lied geschrieben ist mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Lied von der vogelhaften Frei. Das hat der Volk zwischen fallen dicke Wände. Das Lied gesungen mit ner Gannes in die Hand. Das hat der Volk zwischen fallen dicke Wände. Das Lied gesungen mit ner Gannes in die Hand. So sag mich einmal, als du gehst den letzten Weg. Und in den Beinen verstellen bläue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird erbeugt und unser Trott mir seinen Do. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird erbeugt und unser Trott mir seinen